Okay, review time. This will be on the 1980 American League champion Kansas City Royals. Much like the last video I did on the 1980 Philadelphia Phillies, the 1980 Royals are not part of the 1980 Stratomatic Diamond Gem set. This is from the regular release of the 1980 season. Let's get right into the offense with the 1980 Kansas City Royals. I'm going off of the Stratomatic sheet that they release with every season set. And on the sheet where it says lineups most frequently used, they go Willie Wilson 1, Hal McRae 2 at DH. Now, I'll get more into that later on, but for now, let me go by the sheet and I'll give you my thoughts and comments on that later. Let's get started with Willie Wilson and Hal McRae. You see their on base chances right there. I'm going to go ahead and also show you Hal McRae's hits with multiple base advancement. Let's keep those numbers in mind for my comments later on as I break down the offense. Now let's spend a minute talking about George Brett. His famous 1980 season where he hit 390, and you see all of his numbers right there. On base chances are excellent, and his hits with multiple base advancement, very good numbers, and they are also numbers that can go way up depending on the ballpark you're playing in, depending with ballpark effect home runs. So, really, as you would expect, just a tremendous card out of George Brett for 1980. Now, I'm going to break down three more guys in the middle of the order. Now, once again, going back to the lineups most frequently used according to the Stratomatic sheet. They go Porter 4, Akins 5, and Otis 6. So there you see their numbers with multiple base advance hits. I'm also going to go ahead and show you the right fielder, Clint Hurdle. You see his numbers right there. Now I'm going to get into another aspect of the Kansas City Royals 1980 Stratomatic team. Left out of the lineups most frequently used. And this is kind of interesting. John Wathan is not listed in the regular lineup for Stratomatic. However, John Wathan did have 453 at bats in 1980. And you could see on his card he played multiple positions in 1980. So, not being old enough really to remember the 1980 Royals, what I gather from looking at his card, I get the impression that John Wathan was probably number one, the backup catcher, spotting Darrell Porter getting days off, or whenever obviously also Porter would get hurt. Also, he was a guy that they would throw into the lineup playing different positions during the season, whether it be first base or the corner outfield spots. And I know I'm not breaking any ground here because, again, like I said, John Wathan had over 450 at bats in 1980. But I'm going to go ahead and show you all of his numbers right now. And you can see you get really, really solid production out of John Wathan. So the moral of this story is when you're playing with the 1980 Kansas City Royals, especially when you're facing left-handed pitching, you should do everything you can to get John Wathan into the lineup. Now, as I grade the Kansas City Royals offense from 1980, I was a little bit caught between a rock and a hard place because, again, I found myself in a situation saying, okay, what do I go by? Do I go by what Stratomatic is telling me according to their sheet where it says lineups most frequently used and John Wathan is not in the regular lineup? Or do I look at it as whenever I sit down and play with the Kansas City Royals, or whoever else may play with the Kansas City Royals, what would be your go-to lineup? What would be your best lineup? Well, let me look at it this way for now. If I'm just to look at it with the way Stratomatic has it, and once again, let me read you the lineup according to the sheet. Wilson, McRae, Brett, Porter, Akins, Otis, Hurdle, White, Washington. That's your 1 through 9. I did my grading based on what actually happened. And if you go by the numbers, obviously John Wathan sees plenty of playing time in 1980. once again, I refer you back. He had 453 at bats in 1980. So I'm going to factor him into my ratings here. Again, this isn't an issue of where, you have a player who was only up a month or was only with a team for a month and went crazy for a couple of weeks and has a Stratomatic card, which is completely bloated because they base the card on what that player did for the 1 month. No, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of John Wathan was a regular player on the 1980 Kansas City Royals, and the proof is in the number of at bats. So that's how I worked out my grade. So you're going to see here that the 1980 Kansas City Royals grade out as a 3.9 out of 5, which basically puts them right below the rating of where you would say it's a very, very good offense. The middle of the order, I wish the numbers were a little bit better. However, here's how I came to the 4 out of 5 with the Kansas City Royals. I don't believe in having Hal McRae being the number 2 hitter in this lineup. I don't really understand where Stratomatic got that from. If I could drop a major suggestion, if you're playing with the Kansas City Royals, I would go Wilson 1, Wathan 2, Brett 3, McRae 4. That would be a lineup that can stand up against anybody. That is a pretty darn good foursome right over there. Because I believe Hal McRae's card is more geared towards getting runners driven in with single two asterisks or doubles or any other means necessary. So that's my grade on the 1980 Kansas City Royals offense. I give them a 3.9 out of 5. Now, let's go through the defense. First, let's start right up the middle with second base and shortstop, as we always do. No complaints right here. I'll talk about the E rating on UL Washington later, but if you have a 1 and a 2 at shortstop, you got nothing to complain about. So that gets a 5 out of 5. You look at the outfield defense, you have the 1 in left, the 2 in center, but you've got the 3 in right. So if you got a 3 anywhere in the outfield, I can't give the outfield a score of a 4 or higher. So I gave the outfield defense just a notch below a 4 at a 3.75 out of 5. And we look at the E ratings on the 1980 Royals. Here are the issues you're going to have when you roll a split, and you got to roll the D20 to see if there's an error. You've got big issues in right field, shortstop with UL Washington. George Brett's E rating at third base is a little bit high, and Willie Aiken's E rating at first base will kill you. So I kind of had to hit the 1980 Royals over the head with their E rating score. So I had to give them a grade of below average. So that only averaged out to a 2.2 out of 5. So the Kansas City Royals overall defensive score for 1980 comes out to a 3.65 out of 5. Now let's move on to the Kansas City Royals starting rotation. Let's get started with the ace, Dennis Leonard. You see his on base numbers right over there. You could see those especially against right-handed hitting, is a little bit high. It's a little high what you want to see out of your number one guy. Now let's move on to the starting rotation depth. I'm going to show you the numbers for Paul Splitoff, Larry Gura, and Rich Gale. And let's take a look at those numbers right over there. And you can see the big number that really sticks out is Larry Gura. Very solid card in 1980. In fact, you could even make an argument that he has the best card on the rotation. And I'm also going to make a point about Rich Gale later on in the video, but you could see Gale has decent on base numbers, but what I'm not crazy about Rich Gale is there are a number of power opportunities against both sides of the plate on his card. So as I look at the 1980 Royal starting rotation, I would say it's at best a solid starting rotation. It is definitely above average. I had them grade out as a 3.6 out of 5. I just didn't feel like Dennis Leonard's card was the kind of card that would approach a 4 out of 5 rating. Like you see a lot of aces in videos that I've done. I gave him a 3.75 out of 5, and I gave the starting rotation depth a 3.5 out of 5. So their overall starting rotation score comes out to a 3.6 out of 5. Now let's take a look at the bullpen. Obviously, the closer, Dan Quisenberry. Once again, very solid card out of Quiz from that season. Always had very solid cards. And typical Dan Quisenberry, really not a lot of power opportunities on the card either, which you like. I would actually trade one or two chances higher of reaching base on a pitcher's card rather than having lower numbers with home run opportunities. That's just the way I feel about a lot of um, Stratomatic cards when I look at pitchers. So I had no problem giving Dan Quisenberry a perfect score of a 5 out of 5, albeit it's not a complete lockdown, shutdown closer like I've done other videos on where closers for 1 year were just completely unhittable and they have an unbelievable Stratomatic card. But to me, I have no problems with Dan Quisenberry's card. His on base numbers, even though they're not great, they're still very, very good. I feel good giving him a 5 out of 5. Now, here's an issue with the Kansas City Royals bullpen. It's in their depth. Let me go through the numbers here for Marty Patton, Gary Christensen, and Steve Busby. You could see none of those numbers really check out with what you want. I guess you could say that Patton is your setup guy on the 1980 Royals, but really the plan of attack when you play with the 1980 Kansas City Royals is you want to get your starter to get you to Dan Quisenberry. And in case you were wondering, Dan Quisenberry in 1980, they have him listed as a 2 inning reliever. I think there were some years in the past where Quisenberry hit the 3 inning mark as a closer. I would have to look that up. I would also make a little bit of a suggestion if you are playing with the Kansas City Royals. Rich Gale does have relief on his card. So if you're, let's say you're sitting down to play like a best of 5 with a friend or even like a best of 7, Rich Gale is an option that you could use out of the bullpen. But to me, that really doesn't really move the needle anywhere when it comes to grading the Kansas City Royals bullpen depth. So I had them come out below average at a 2 out of 5. And you're going to see in the end that that is really what hurt the Kansas City Royals overall score. So the Royals bullpen comes out with a grade of a 3.5 out of 5. So as we peel everything back and we look at the Kansas City Royals from 1980 as a whole, you're going to see that they grade out at a 3.7 out of 5, which was actually a score which in a way, it kind of disappointed me a little bit when I came up with this final grade because I do feel like this team is a little better than their grade came out. However, that's why sitting down and doing these kind of evaluations, it kind of makes you look at the cards differently rather than you're just sitting down with a team and you're trying to just win a game. If you're not really playing with the team and you just sit down and you take out any bias, any pre-notions as to, okay, well, I play with this team a lot and I never win with them, or this guy always gets hit, or this hitter never comes up with a big hit. If you just look at the cards for what they are, it was kind of eye-opening to me how this team struggles with E ratings in the field and bullpen depth. Those are two really glaring weaknesses on the 1980 Royals. Don't get me wrong, this is still a good team. It is a well above average team. I think you can make the offense even better if you play around with the lineup a little bit and you don't go by the Stratomatic sheet with the most frequently used lineup. They do have some guys that you can mess around with and pick and choose different spots that you hit them in the order. But the way I came out with the score, the 1980 Kansas City Royals come out to a 3.7 out of 5. So that's my final grade on the 1980 American League champion Kansas City Royals. Once again, I thank you all for watching. It is greatly appreciated. And my next video will be on the 1992 world champion Toronto Blue Jays. Have a good day, everyone.